Hey there, and welcome. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we're going to unpack an absolutely epic 250-year historical timeline. In this explainer, we're tracing the fascinating, highly dramatic story of the House of Saud. This isn't just your standard story of a royal family. It's a massive saga of a dynasty that has literally risen from the desert sands, faced complete and total collapse, and somehow reinvented itself time and time again to become one of the most powerful families on the global stage. So, let's dive right in and see how a tiny oasis town eventually transformed into the modern Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Here's a quick roadmap of our journey. We'll be mapping out three distinct eras: the first state, their bitter exile during the second state, and the dramatic reconquest of the third state. Then, we'll look at the massive shift brought on by the discovery of oil, the transformative reign of King Faisal, and finally, how all of this shapes the modern kingdom today.
All right, let's kick things off right at the beginning with the first state, spanning from 1744 to 1818, and look at what we can really call the defining pact of this entire story.
Okay, picture this. The entire foundation of the House of Saud traces back to a single event in 1744 in a small oasis town called Diriyah. The local chieftain there, Muhammad bin Saud, formed an alliance with an Islamic theologian named Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab. Wahhab was actually seeking refuge at the time, and he brought with him a specific evolving ideology known as Wahhabism. This is an Islamic fundamentalist theology that puts a massive emphasis on strict religious purity. To really grasp the history here, we have to understand that this specific theology has been deeply, almost inextricably intertwined with the Saudi family's survival and expansion for over 2 centuries. To actually build their new state, these two leaders created a pretty brilliant division of power. Muhammad bin Saud took the title of emir, which gave him control over all secular and military power. Meanwhile, Muhammad ibn Wahhab became the imam, holding absolute spiritual and religious authority. Together, they made it their mission to bring this purity to Arabia. And let me tell you, this dynamic fueled some incredibly aggressive expansion. They directly challenged the massive Ottoman Empire, eventually seizing the Islamic holy cities of Mecca and Medina. They even went so far as to publicly denounce the Turkish Sultan as unworthy of his titles.
But, as you might guess, that explosive success didn't last forever. While 1744 was the foundation of the first state, the family would find themselves having to completely rebuild in 1824, and then literally reconquer all over again in 1902. The whole history of this family is defined by these turbulent, repeated rises and catastrophic falls.
And wow, did that first catastrophic fall happen hard in 1818. The Ottoman Empire absolutely did not take the loss of Mecca and Medina lightly. They responded with overwhelming force, sending 50,000 troops right into Arabia. They besieged Diriyah for months before just completely leveling the town. Every Wahhabist theologian they could find was executed. The Saudi leader at the time, Emir Abdullah bin Saud, was captured, dragged all the way to Istanbul, and publicly beheaded. And in this incredibly stark display of ideological warfare, the Ottomans actually forced him to listen to lute music right before his execution. That was something explicitly forbidden by his Wahhabist beliefs. His severed head was then thrown into the Bosphorus.
Which brings us to our next chapter, Exile and the Second State, where the family's focus shifts entirely to just surviving the desert.
So, despite the total destruction of the first state, the family did survive. A grandson managed to escape the siege, eventually establishing a second state with Riyadh as its new capital. But the instability was constant. By 1891, the Saudi leader Abdulrahman bin Faisal was defeated in battle by the rival Rashidi tribe and driven entirely out of Riyadh. The surviving family members had to flee into the harsh southern desert, taking refuge with Bedouin tribes and eventually hiding out in Kuwait. By 1900, Abdulrahman actually just gave up his ambitions of ever recovering the secular kingdom, deciding he'd focus purely on being a spiritual leader instead.
But the story definitely doesn't end in exile. We're pivoting now to reconquest and the third state. This is the ultimate turning point for the dynasty.
Now, Abdurrahman might have given up his secular ambitions, but his son absolutely did not. His son, Abdulaziz, who's often known in the West as Ibn Saud, took over the secular and military leadership of the family in 1901. And this part is literally like something out of an action movie. To reclaim his family's lost kingdom, he organized this incredibly audacious stealth attack. On the night of his 27th birthday, Abdulaziz and just 40 of his kinsmen used some tilted palm trees to physically scale the walls of Riyadh. They launched a total surprise raid on the citadel, slaughtering the Rashidi governor before the guards even knew it was happening, and with that one stunning victory, the third Saudi state was born.
Just think about this number for a second. 60.
Before that wall-scaling raid when Abdulaziz first set out from Kuwait to reclaim his birthright, his entire initial raiding party consisted of just 60 men, mostly his relatives, a half-brother, or some cousins. That is the staggering reality here. The foundation of the massive, immensely wealthy modern Saudi state that we know today, it all started with a raiding party of only 60 guys wandering the desert.
Of course, Abdulaziz needed a lot more than 60 men to actually hold a kingdom, so he allied himself with the Ikhwan. These were fierce Bedouin warriors who had been converted to Wahhabism. Early on, they were totally instrumental in subjugating the desert and crushing rival tribes. But it turned out to be a really complicated double-edged sword. By 1927, these fundamentalist warriors actually rebelled against the House of Saud. They felt the Saudi leadership was getting corrupted by their sudden wealth and their new ties with Western powers. So, by 1929, Abdulaziz had to turn his own military against them, decisively crushing the rebellion of the exact same warriors who had just helped him conquer his kingdom.
The crucial takeaway here is that Abdulaziz wasn't just a desert warrior. The guy was a total master of geopolitics. He knew exactly how to navigate a rapidly changing world. During World War I, he allied the House of Saud with the British Empire against their common enemy, the Ottoman Turks. And that paid off, because after the war, the British supplied him with a massive glut of surplus munitions. He used those weapons in 1925 to conquer Mecca, ending 700 years of Hashemite rule there. By 1932, he officially established the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Later, during World War II, he officially remained neutral but clearly leaned toward the Allies. Near the end of the war, he held vital multi-day meetings with both Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, forging the foundational Saudi-American cooperation over regional politics and, most importantly, oil. Which perfectly sets up the event that completely rewrote the global map, the discovery of oil, and the rapid transformation of the kingdom.
Talk about a game changer. In 1938, a massive commercial producing well was completed in eastern Saudi Arabia by the company that would eventually become Aramco. They discovered more proved and accessible reserves right there than in all of North and South America combined. By 1947, daily oil output exceeded 400,000 barrels, and it was climbing fast. This sudden, staggering wealth abruptly thrust a kingdom that had literally been forged by desert raiding parties into an era of incredibly rapid, unrelenting modernization.
And this modernization birthed our next era, King Faisal and global power, a period defined by the massive tension between ancient tradition and rapid progress.
So after Abdulaziz passed away in 1953, his eldest son King Saud took over. But Saud was widely viewed as a weak leader, especially with socialist movements rising across the Arab world. So his brother, Prince Faisal, forcibly took power, backed by a religious fatwa and the consensus of the family, forcing King Saud to abdicate and live in exile. King Faisal then went on to institute a huge wave of reforms. He abolished slavery, instituted sweeping education, law, and welfare reforms, and, very notably, introduced television to the kingdom. But these modernizations caused massive societal friction. In 1966, one of Faisal's own nephews led a violent, religiously motivated protest against the new television station, and that nephew was actually shot dead by a policeman.
Faisal himself was deeply conservative and staunchly anti-communist, heavily promoting pan-Islamism across the region. And his most defining act on the global stage came during the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. King Faisal famously withdrew Saudi oil from world markets in protest over Western support for Israel. You've probably heard of the 1973 oil crisis. Well, this embargo was the primary force behind it. It absolutely skyrocketed global energy prices, cemented his prestige globally to the point where he was named Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1974, and simultaneously fueled an unprecedented economic boom back home.
But all that deep tension between modern progress and fundamentalism, it culminated in something truly tragic. On March 25, 1975, King Faisal was shot point-blank and killed by his own nephew. This assassin was actually the brother of the young man who had been killed by police years earlier during the protests against the television station. It was a stark, brutal reminder of the internal, familial, and societal struggles that echo all the way back to that original pact of 1744. The assassin was ultimately convicted of regicide by the highest religious court and publicly beheaded.
And that brings us straight into our final era, the modern kingdom and the successors. After Faisal's death, the throne actually passed horizontally through the sons of the original founder, Abdulaziz. King Khalid took over, followed by his brothers, King Fahd, King Abdullah, and the current monarch, King Salman.
Throughout all these reigns, heavily fueled by consistently high oil prices, Saudi Arabia's cities just continued to grow and modernize at a blistering pace. All the while, the kingdom continued to forge increasingly closer political and economic ties to the United States.
Which leaves us right in the present day, facing a really critical question. The current crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, will likely be the very first of Abdulaziz's grandchildren to take the throne, ending that long line of brotherly succession. As he pushes for an even more rapidly modernized Saudi Arabia, how exactly will he navigate this immense, deeply rooted tension between 21st century progress and that fundamental 1744 religious pact that his entire family's survival was built upon? It's a dynamic that has defined his ancestors for over 250 years, and it's absolutely the defining question for the future of the Middle East. Thank you so much.